In 1774, Adams urged an aspiring politician to adopt Cicero as his model. He wrote regarding Cicero's proconsulship at Lilybaeum in Sicily, "He did not receive this office as persons do nowadays as a gift or a farm, but as a public trust, and considered it as a theater in which the eyes of the world were upon him." When Rome was short of grain, Cicero managed to feed the city without treating his own province unfairly. When Adams, who was one of the greatest orators of his day, rose before the Continental Congress on July 1st, 1776, to rebut John Dickinson's contention that American independence would be premature, the New Englander thought of Cicero. He recorded in his diary, "I began by saying that this was the first time in my life that I had ever wished for the talents and eloquence of the ancient orators of Greece and Rome, for I was very sure that none of them ever had before him a question of more importance to his country and to the world." Adams' admiration for Cicero outlived the American Revolution. In fact, he spent the summer of 1796, just months before assuming the presidency, reading the Roman statesman's essays, or I should say rereading. In 1803, Adams quoted Cicero regarding the true public servant, quote, "Such a man will devote himself entirely to the republic, nor will he covet power or riches. He will adhere closely to justice and equity, that, provided he can preserve these virtues, although he may give offense and create enemies by them, he will set death itself at defiance, rather than abandon his principles." No one followed this ethic better than Adams. In the 1760s, he had refused the lucrative and prestigious position of Admiralty Court judge because he considered these juryless British courts unconstitutional. In 1770, he had sacrificed his popularity to defend the British soldiers accused of murder in the Boston Massacre. As president in 1799 and 1800, he had made peace with Napoleonic France, leaving Jefferson the glory of the Louisiana Purchase at the expense of his own re-election. It split his party. The Hamiltonian wing wanted war with France, and Adams knew he was basically giving up his re-election by making peace with France. And ironically, who is it who reaps the benefit? It's Jefferson, because he is able to make the Louisiana Purchase with Napoleon, which would not have been possible if Adams had not made peace with France. So while no other founder yearned so much for popularity, none so continually sacrificed it to a strict code of ethics as Adams. It is not fanciful to suppose that when making such painful decisions, Adams found consolation in contemplating the Roman statesman's sacrifices and the eternal glory they had earned him. Indeed, as the years advanced, Adams felt a greater and greater kinship with Cicero. Adams' integrity, like that of Cicero, found its greatest expression in his unwillingness to endorse party favoritism, leading to unpopularity in both parties. And his response to critics was marked by the same petulance and vanity as the Romans. The only difference between Cicero and Adams was that Cicero, uninfluenced by Christian notions of humility, had found nothing shameful in vanity. While Adams defended not only himself but also his Roman hero against the charge of vanity, it would never have occurred to Cicero to deny the charge, nor his contemporaries to make it. Adams clung tenaciously to a theme that the other founders also embraced, the theme of the lone wolf hero. You can think of Socrates, Demosthenes, and Cicero. They're all good examples. The lone wolf hero who sacrifices short-term popularity, which can be purchased only by vice, for long-term fame, which can be purchased only by virtue. The aristocrat who saves the ignorant masses, often at the cost of his own life, from themselves. The classical hero treated the bribes of monarchs and the follies of demagogues with equal disdain. Likewise, the founders were as disgusted by the fawning courtiers who crowded around George III in search of preferment as they were by demagogues who manipulated popular passions to increase their own power. The equation of virtue with independence of thought and action, when combined with a concomitant equation of vice with factionalism — the Roman historians despised the factio, the favorite instrument of demagogues — contributed greatly to the anti-party sentiment that dominated the early history of the United States. Washington spends most of his farewell address warning against political parties, which we take to be just a normal feature of life. Where did he get that? It was from the classics and this idea that that's bad, parties, political parties. They associated the factio with Caesar. That's the instrument that Caesar uses to get power. The founders' classical villains, speaking of Caesar, were as important as their classical heroes. The horror and disgust that Roman historians' accounts of imperial corruption had instilled in the founders' minds in their youth accounts for much of their exaggeration of the brutality of the well-intentioned but inept King George III. Similarly, the classical historians' numerous descriptions of mob violence and chaos explain much of the founders' fear of demagogues. The founders detested the Roman emperors. During the Revolutionary period, the founders compared the British Parliament and the Tories with the Roman emperors and their minions. Samuel Adams even wrote, "The Stamp Act was like the sword that Nero wished for to have decollated the Roman people at a stroke." A bit exaggeration, do you think? Such improbable analogies were not mere rhetorical flourishes. They represented a genuine fear of tyranny inherent in nearly all classical texts. Tyranny was an inexorable cancer that must be destroyed in its early stages. Unconstitutional taxes, however small, violated sacred principles of liberty as surely as mass executions. Indeed, if unchecked, the former would likely eventuate in the latter. The slippery slope was a quintessentially classical idea. The founders also detested leaders like Sulla, Catiline, Mark Antony, and Julius Caesar, whose corruption of the Roman Republic had resulted in the rise of the emperors. In 1777, John Adams compared British General William Howe's peace proposals with Sulla's favorite tactic of bribing his rival's troops. In his vindication of the conduct of the House of Representatives, 1762, James Otis, who was really the first leader of the revolutionary movement, quoted Cicero's rebuke of Catiline in denunciation of the Tory Martin Howard for advancing the doctrine of virtual representation. He quoted Cicero's rebuke of Catiline, which was, "Do you dare to show yourself in the light?" In 1766, John Dickinson insisted that opposition to oppression was not equivalent to disloyalty to the king. Dickinson wrote, "Should he complain," meaning the king, "would it not be the complaint of Catiline that the senator he attempted to assassinate was so disrespectful to him that he would not receive the sword in his body?" In 1779, Christopher Gadsden claimed, "Catiline's gang was not more atrocious than such as are daily deluded over to the enemy from our western parts." In 1806, as the Aaron-Burr conspiracy progressed, Thomas Jefferson compared Burr with Catiline. Perhaps Jefferson was engaged in wishful thinking here, since Catiline had been killed in his attempt to destroy the Roman Republic. Both Jefferson and John Adams accused the Hamiltonian Federalists of using public grief over George Washington's death for political purposes, just as Mark Antony had utilized Julius Caesar's demise, though Jefferson believed that the publication of Washington's papers would prevent, quote, "the high priests of federalism," end quote, from using them to support their own views, as Mark Antony had used Caesar's secret papers.